Bruce, the concept of free will is really a very deep probe to what our mental lives are all about, and important to get right. The fundamental question is there free will? Is it an illusion? And if it's an illusion or not an illusion, what's the interface between free will and decision making?
Well, whether free will is an illusion fits with the problem of deciding what an illusion is. The experience of free will is real. The illusion is that you think you have the option to make a different choice. That's the aspect which is illusory. I think it's an illusion because I think that the options or the influences which shape your decision, ultimately you don't have any control over. Therefore, you don't have any free will.
Okay, I mean, that means that the sequence of events, however they are, conscious or unconscious, that lead up to your decision is because it's part of the physical universe. You have to do that because there's nothing outside the physical. Now, some would say this so-called compatibilist argument that free will can be compatible with determinism, that everything is determined, because nobody is holding a gun to your head, you're not under alcoholic influences, nobody's forcing you, so it's sort of the volition comes from yourself, and that's a compatibilist free will.
Right, and to me that still adds an additional component which I don't recognize. So for me, I don't find that a compelling argument.
What can we learn about free will from the studies of decision making or from children? I mean, is there any way we can make progress, if not frontal assault on free will, at least try to understand what its composition is?
Well, if you think about choices and decisions being the output of a lot of competing influences, then you can understand why a lack of control over impulses would compromise free will. Mm-hmm. And indeed, the sorts of things, and these end up in court cases, was someone actually in control of their impulses? Did they have a tumor? Were they under influence of alcohol? There isn't a fine dividing line, although, of course, there are different legal precedences of what's considered mitigating circumstances. But the idea or the importance of the ability to self-regulate is really central to the whole notion of what free will is. And certainly self-regulation requires what we call inhibition, or capacity to suppress the urges or the impulses to do one thing versus the other. Now, that's a function of the frontal lobes, because we know that these areas are active when you're suppressing thoughts or you're inhibiting behaviors, or if you damage them as an adult or you compromise them with various drugs, then your ability to make free choices is not, it's not retained. So there's an interesting line of work looking at children's developing free will, if you want to call it, what we would call impulse control, and how this relates to their other performance and behavior, how their schooling and education.
What are some specific studies?
So the most famous and actually most amusing example is the delay of gratification, where you can just put something like a marshmallow of great temptation in front of the child, and you tell them, if you wait, you can have two, and then you simply measure how long they wait. And what's remarkable is that, well, first of all, we know that young children have a problem doing that. But if you then measure or take the time that they manage to withhold that, it turns out to be a very accurate predictor of all manner of things: scholastic achievement, 11 years later, how well they perform on exams,
really? Wow.
how popular they are with other kids, whether they become drug addicts at 27 years of age. Something measured at 4 years of age will predict how they behave.
Wow. And the relationship is a direct one. The more they're able to control themselves or have this inhibitory capability at 4 years old, will lead to the positive resolution of all of those criteria that you mentioned?
Yeah, so what the kids typically do in these situations is, well, you might say, well, what's actually being inhibited? Well, I think what they're doing is they're selecting another range of behaviors to distract them from the desirability of the marshmallow. And again, that's a lesson for life, isn't it? That, if you want to avoid giving into temptations, supplement it or suppress it or replace it with some other activity.
Is that what they're doing?
Yeah, in fact, this is the line of research. It's not my current outline, but this is what people are starting to look at. Are there intervention programs where you can give kids alternative strategies to take them out of this sort of compulsion and see how that influences their behavior.
What are the specific example you gave? I mean, with the marshmallow, and if you want it now, you get one. If you wait, you get two. I mean, how long do they wait? How old? I mean,
well, there's a lot of individual variation, and that's why it's very
order of magnitude.
Depends on how good a marshmallow is, how big it is. I suppose, like everything in life, you know, it's context specific.
Right.
But we've been looking, for example, at their ability on these sorts of tasks, and then testing them on other things like how well they can regulate their behavior when they're searching for desirable objects. So, you know, I think this executive function, this frontal lobe capability, spills over into all areas of life. If you imagine you can't suppress your thoughts and your behaviors, you know, and you're impulsive, I mean, that can make you a very difficult person to get on with. Right. And if you think about it, if you have a conversation, we all know people who feel the need to dominate the conversation, or who just can't stop themselves calling someone a jerk. You know, there is this need for self-control, free will, in just about every spectrum of human behavior. So not only in kind of searching for things or doing tasks. If you think about doing tasks requires regulating all the components to the task. Very few tasks is just simple one thing or the other. Sure, if you've got no executive functions, you can't plan, and you get absorbed by the various elements of a task. You need to be able to coordinate these things together, and that's what executive functions do.
And who have all these options or stimulants or temptations. And what you have to do is regulate those.
Yes.
And that's an inhibitory function.
And that's an inhibitory function. And when those get compromised, then I think free will gets compromised because, as I've said, free will is really the emergent property of all the things which are competing for your choices and your decisions.
Yeah, but you said there's no free will. So
well, there's no free will in that sense, but we have to have an operational definition of what we're talking about, which is the output or the emergent property of a multitude.
So what you're saying is that the output of free will has a direct positive correlation with the capacity to have a strong executive function, which is inhibitory. And this can be seen at a very young age, and it's predictable for life, which is really remarkable. It's kind of scary.
It is kind of scary, but but it does mean it can be encouraged as well. Sure. You know, people try, and I think parenting styles probably play into that as well. If you allow the kid free rein, then you're not really teaching them the sort of strategies that they need to adopt in order to integrate and control their behavior. And that's what a lot of education is. If you think about it, you know, we have one of the longest childhoods of every species on the planet. Now, why is that? You might say it's to learn things. Well, that's part of it, but I also think it's, to become, a social animal, to become integrated into a situation where you have to coordinate your thoughts and behaviors with everyone else. So that's a protracted, time zone. Your frontal lobes don't reach adult levels until you're an adult.
Right. Which means you have to go through the teenage years.
Yeah, there's some people believe that the teenage years are characterized by impulsive behaviors.
And therefore, the discussion of free will is not just some philosophical discussion, but really has impact on all social activities in society.
I think we're going to make more mileage by understanding the biological underpinnings for this. I agree the issue of free will is a philosophical issue of great interest, but ultimately, in terms of application, I think when you start to understand the brain and how it changes and how it becomes integrated into complex social arrangements and organizations, and the importance of self-control in those situations, then you got a better handle on it. For me, I think developmental psychology, what I work on, actually can contribute to what are always been considered philosophical questions. Because once you have an appreciation of how the brain changes or influences thoughts and behaviors, then you can kind of get a better handle on what's going on. And understanding the importance of inhibitory control in particular, I think, is of central importance to free will. Because if free will is this emergent output of a system of all the influences and all the kind of things competing for your behavior, if you don't have inhibitory control, if you don't have a brain which is sufficiently mature to suppress these things, then you're always going to be the victim of impulse. And so understanding this developmental trajectory is vital. And of course, it takes a long time to achieve those levels of adult free will. You have to become an adult. The brain it keeps maturing, the frontal lobes in particular don't reach maturity until well into the teenage years. And until we actually appreciate that and understand that, then I think we're always going to be deluding ourselves that this is entirely just an abstracted philosophical problem. It's really an issue about how our brains are wired.